Although they seem to have many similarities, rock climbing and alpine climbing are two completely distinct activities. To demonstrate the contrast between the two, we wrote the instructions below. What distinguishes alpine climbing from rock climbing, then? While alpine climbing is a more all-encompassing activity focused on reaching mountain summits, rock climbing is a specialized activity focused on steep cliffs. Compared to alpine climbing, rock climbing is essentially a more specialized activity. The act of climbing difficult peaks using a variety of techniques, such as rock climbing, ice climbing, or skiing, is known as alpine climbing. However, rock climbing simply involves using your hands and toes to scale steep, vertical sides, and the top may not always be the ultimate objective. Continue to read this article and we will do a cross-comparison in between alpine climbing versus rock climbing. Alpine climbing versus rock climbing. The activity of ascending steep or almost vertical cliffs with your hands and feet is known as rock climbing. At other times, all you need to do is get to a group of anchors that mark the conclusion of the course you're on. Sometimes, you want to climb to the top of the cliffs. Instead of always reaching the summit, the objective is to ascend a set of holds that have previously been climbed by someone else. In alpine climbing, a more technical kind of alpine climbing, you use a number of techniques to attempt to reach the peak of difficult mountains. It often entails climbing up rocky terrain, navigating snow and ice, and traversing sizable glaciers. Greater than read, is traveling a hobby? The ultimate guide to an exciting way of life. Greater than learn about the downsides of traveling as a hobby. Alpine climbing is an inclusive activity. Track and field may be used as a comparison to better comprehend the differences between the two sports. Alpine climbing is comparable to competing in a triathlon or a decathlon, while rock climbing is comparable to running a 5,000-meter race. This refers to the fact that alpine climbing is considerably more made up of many activities than rock climbing, which is its own distinct sport. Rock climbing is all you do while you're rock climbing, but when you're alpine climbing, you'll need to employ a range of other talents to reach the top of the peak you're aiming for. These abilities could include hiking, mixed climbing, and glacier travel. Rock climbing is really a talent necessary for alpine climbing, which is why you often find a significant overlap between rock climbers and mountaineers. The distinction between the two disciplines might now become hazy at times. For instance, three mountaineers try to scale a ridge in the Himalayas in the movie Meru. They are on a steep rock face for a large portion of the ridge and are employing tools and equipment for rock climbing. So, are they alpine climbing or rock climbing? The truth is, they're engaged in both. One of the intriguing aspects of this difference is that rock climbing is one of the components of alpine climbing, therefore you may do rock climbing while on an alpine climbing expedition. You can rock climb without becoming a mountaineer, however. Going to a climbing gym or even simply the neighborhood crag isn't truly regarded as alpine climbing. In reality, we believe that the great majority of rock climbers do not engage in alpine climbing. Where does the difference thus exist? How can you tell what activity you're engaged in? The historical setting between the two provides the solution to this query. Background as a sport. Alpine climbing has been a sport for more than a century before rock climbing. In truth, Michael Gabriel Picard and Jacques Balmat's ascent of Mont Blanc in 1786 might be considered the beginning of climbing. The sport of high-altitude alpine climbing was thus made popular, and during the next 150 years, it expanded across the globe, from the Alps to the Andes to the Himalayas, peaking in 1953 with the first ascent of Mount Everest. Rock climbing wasn't a separate activity in the early days. Rock climbing was only considered as an extension of alpine climbing, more of a means than anything else. Mountaineers would engage in it when necessary, but no one made a special effort to do so. Only when it was required to reach a mountain's top was it practiced. The 1950s saw a start to this changing. Understanding the world at that period, particularly in America, is crucial to understanding how rock climbing developed. People want uniformity, risk avoidance, and manufacturing jobs that would enable them to purchase a home and a dishwasher at the conclusion of World War II. The prevailing cultural mindset at the time was compatible with alpine climbing. It was seen as a gentlemanly sport played by gentlemen who did all in their power to lessen the risk they were facing. But after a time, a counterculture started to emerge. American youth started to look for challenges and rebel against the conformist structure of their culture under the leadership of writers like Jack Kerouac. They learned about climbing but rebelled against its rigid guidelines and risk-averse mindset. They made rock climbing into its own sport as a means to protest against much of the pomp surrounding alpine climbing by taking what was essentially a marginal activity and making it into a competitive sport. These disobedient adolescents began to seek out difficult cliff faces, pushing themselves to the limit to see whether they could be climbed, rather than climbing just when required and taking the shortest way to the summit. Consequently, rock climbing became a sport. Similarities between alpine climbing versus rock climbing. There are many parallels between alpine climbing and rock climbing, including the following. 1. Environment. Mountainous areas are common locations for both rock climbing and alpine climbing, generally far from human habitation. One of the primary attractions of sports is the ability to practice a demanding but gratifying activity while being outside in nature, which is good for your mental health. 2. Tools. Many of the equipment used in rock climbing and alpine climbing are comparable, although alpine climbing has a much broader toolset. Along with the ropes and protective gear, comparable packs and outfits are also often utilized. In addition, many of the methods, such as belaying, are similar. Differences between alpine climbing versus rock climbing. Having said that, the sport also has a few significant distinctions. 3. Multiple skills/tools needed. As we have indicated, alpine climbing calls for a far broader range of equipment and abilities. Along with the necessary rock climbing equipment, such ropes and harnesses, you will also require a snow axe, boots for alpine climbing, ski equipment, layered clothes, crampons. For climbing, you also require a larger range of talents. Along with being an excellent rock climber, you need be proficient in 4. Dangerous snow travel. I'll just say it, ice climbing is not nearly as risky a sport as alpine climbing. This is due to the fact that it's often used in more inhospitable places, with lower security and bigger stakes. Avalanches, crevasses, hypothermia, and altitude sickness are things you should be concerned about. You normally just need to be concerned about the risk of falling while rock climbing. It is less perilous than alpine climbing, but it is still vital and should be treated seriously. Final words. Rock climbing is often easier to reach. You may practice climbing all year long since it is available in even the communities in the midst of the grassland. You need mountains, which not everyone possesses, to go climbing. It is less expensive and simpler to learn rock climbing. Rock climbing has the advantage that you can go the following day. A climbing gym and a day ticket are all that are need. Due to everything we discussed previously as well as the sheer number of talents required, alpine climbing is far more difficult to start into. To go climbing, you'll probably need to hire a guide, which might cost up to $200. Alpine climbing offers more rewards. Now, this is a very contentious topic, and we must state up front that this is just my opinion. Although we am a devoted rock climber and we like it, if forced to choose one, we would say that alpine climbing is more satisfying. It is a genuinely fantastic activity to pursue because of the risk, isolation, and high skill levels necessary.